Are you or someone you know on the autism spectrum, yet was never diagnosed until an adult? Why is it that despite important laws passed against disability-based discrimination, so many cracks remain in the system? In this video, we will go over 3 explanations based on the history of disability legislation in the United States that show why the country continues to leave behind too many autistic Americans despite its promise of equal opportunity. And although you may be an autistic residing elsewhere, these explanations can also potentially reveal why you and many others around the world are left behind. Number 1, poor funding. Many complain that providing disability services and accommodations is too expensive. Others remain even more skeptical of helping those with learning differences. Some have even complained that it can lead to economic collapse. This is why Presidents Richard Nixon and Gerald Ford constantly stalled the implementation of Section 504 of the 1973 Rehabilitation Act, one of the earliest American disability rights laws. Not until President Jimmy Carter's administration did the full implementation of the law come into effect, and none of the fear-mongering of economic collapse ever came true. But just last September, many states have attempted to challenge the constitutionality of 504, a challenge that should have never happened in the first place. President Ford, to his credit, did sign into law the Education for All Handicapped Children Act, which Congress passed in 1975 with the promise of paying 40% of the funding required for educating students with disabilities. President George H.W. Bush updated the law into the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act in 1990, which placed greater emphasis on helping students with disabilities with life skills and transitions to adulthood, services that are all but indispensable to an autistic individual's personal health, development, and growth. But despite these important updates, the federal government has at best funded only 18% of the 40% share it promised to pay for special education services, not even half of the share it promised. As Martin Luther King would put it, America has defaulted on this promissory note, giving us a bad check, a check marked insufficient funds. This leads to the second explanation, giving only the bare minimum. With inadequate money dedicated to students with disabilities, many schools constantly find pathetic reasons to avoid evaluating students who may potentially have a learning difference such as autism. You will hear schools tell the disgraceful lie that a child is ineligible for special education services because they have good grades or are in the gifted program, despite signs indicating the presence of a learning difference like autism. In other words, you should only be afforded the bare minimum to perform quote-unquote good enough just to get by. This egregious attitude is why, despite the extraordinary talents autistics and other neurodivergent students may possess, they remain grossly underrepresented in higher education. This is especially true of twice exceptionals, students who are intellectually gifted and possess a disability such as autism, ADHD, or dyslexia. Tragically, these students are the ones most neglected by the system. They either end up being excluded from opportunities for gifted students due to disability despite being gifted themselves, or placed in a gifted opportunity without any of the accommodations that can help them excel in it. Both options are discriminatory. Neither is healthy for the student's personal growth and development, and should not be tolerated by any parent of a twice exceptional, and any school that tolerates these scenarios as failing the student. But by restricting them to these scenarios, the system effectively shuts out autistics from many professional opportunities in areas in which they can even enjoy and excel in, such as history, the sciences, and the law. By dumping only the bare minimum just to get by, the system denies these students a free, appropriate public education mandated by IDEA. Unfortunately, even in the current century, there were school districts in many American jurisdictions that applied the idea that students with disabilities should only be afforded the bare minimum to get by. These schools imposed a legal standard called merely more than de minimis to define the level of help mandated. Not until 2017 did a unanimous Supreme Court strike that down, declaring that the level of help required under IDEA is markedly more demanding than the standard adopted by those schools. But even today, you might still come across professionals in educational settings who cling to the already rejected notion of bare minimum and deny you accommodations or services as a result. Listen. Accessibility is a right under the laws of this country. That's not merely more than my opinion or the opinion of others. It is the law of this land, and you should never be denied accommodations or an evaluation because you happen to get by without them. Number 3, equating autistics with the R word. Yes, that word, the disgusting, offensive word that even some people from previous generations still use to associate with autistics. This was exactly why I, a late diagnosed autistic myself, was overlooked. Associating autism with that word is why so-called higher functioning autistics get overlooked. It was also the same reason why, even as late as the 1980s, publicly being considered autistic would land you in a mental institution. Even parents with nonverbal autistic kids face pressure to leave their kids at these facilities. But these very institutions committed the most egregious abuses against autistics and others with learning differences. Those who have and continue to associate the R word with autism do a grave disservice to all of us in the autistic community, no matter what our areas of challenge. As one saying puts it, the so-called high-functioning term ignores the hardships, while the so-called low-functioning terminology ignores potentials. There are nonverbal autistics who have been able to eventually gain the ability to communicate verbally thanks to access to the right therapies and support. Some of these autistics have even gone on to become attorneys. Hence, it is insulting and never a good idea to use the R word to describe autism, no matter the challenges present. This myth-based approach denies the areas of challenge faced by so-called high-functioning autistics, not only neglecting them, but also the needs of so-called low-functioning autistics, since the R word grossly underestimates the potential of the latter. In fact, the R word is in large part responsible for the bare minimum approach towards disability services and accommodations. Hence, proponents of this approach are dead wrong to claim that it prioritizes those who need help the most. In reality, no matter what quote-unquote functioning level given, the approach leaves everyone neglected in the end. By the way, if you want to learn more, don't forget to show some support by hitting the like and subscribe button. Take care, and until next time.